Okay guys, cosine and sine graphs. It says let f of x equal 4 cosine of x. So the only thing changing here is our amplitude, right? We have our normal cosine graph. The only thing that's going to change is this 4, and this becomes -4. It says, what is the y-intercept? 4. For what number's x between negative pi to pi is the graph decreasing. So they only want you to look from here to here. Where is it decreasing? Just from an x value of 0 to pi. Then they want to know the absolute minimum value. It's just every time it hits -4, right? And then the last thing they want to know is, where does f of x equal 4? Okay, so if you've drawn your graph, you need to make sure you get all of them that are in the interval. So draw the entire interval, -2 pi, 0, and 2 pi. And then the final one is it wants to know where the x-intercepts are. So there were 2 more answers here. I cut it off to fit it on the page. Plug in k values. If you make k 1 here, is 2 pi an x-intercept? No, so check it off. Here, if we make k 0, then we have a -1 times pi over 2. Is -pi over 2 an intercept? Yes. Let's make k 1, 2 minus 1 times pi. So pi over 2, is that an intercept? Yes, it's going to be this answer. I'm going to keep going. Okay, the next one, it says match the function y, 9 cosine pi over 4x. So now we have an amplitude change and a period change. So I'm going to look at my graphs and rule out anything I can. The first thing I'm going to rule out are my graphs that have an amplitude of 4. And then I'm going to look at these 2. And honestly, even if I don't check my period, which my period is t equals 2 pi over omega, I notice that this looks like a sine graph and this is a cosine graph. I don't even have to do this calculation to figure out that A is going to be my answer. Okay, next one. Get familiar again with the graphing features, the graphing tools, because I know you might have just we haven't used them in a while. So for the y equals cosine of 2x, we have just a period change. So our period is 2 pi over omega. Well, omega's 2, so our new period is just going to be pi. Then we answer our equations. Your domain and range for all cosine and sine graphs are -infinity to infinity. I'm sorry, just the domain is all real numbers. The range for a cosine and sine graph is -1 to 1 with brackets, unless you have an amplitude change and or a vertical shift up or down, okay? Next, when it says graph the following function, we have 3 cosine of x plus 2. Now we do have that amplitude change and a vertical shift. So we've graphed it. I like to find my domain and range once I graph it. Again, the domain of sine and cosine is all real numbers. But now, get this from the graph. Your range is going to be from -1 to 5 because your midline has shifted up 2 and you have an amplitude of 3. So it goes 2 plus 3, which is 5, and 2 minus 3, which is -1. Okay, final one. Now we have a negative cosine graph. So our cosine graph is being flipped. Sorry, I'm trying to zoom out a little. So the cosine graph now will not start at the positive value. It's going to start at the negative value, right? So they want us to find the equation of our graph. This is not a sine graph. We know it's cosine, and we know it's a negative cosine. We also know that the only thing that's changed is our period. So we find what one complete cycle is. The period on this graph is 3 pi over 4. So now we know big T, but we have to solve for the omega. So I plug it in, 3 pi over 4 equals 2 pi over omega. So my omega equals 8 over 3. And we type this in. Just make sure you don't forget your negative. Okay, I think we have one more of the cosine and sine graphs. It says, write the equation of the sine with an amplitude of 7 and a period of 6 pi. This is the one, remember, you could have a -7 or a +7 in the front, and your amplitude is still going to be 7. So we always pick this option. The a less than 0 would have a -7 in the front, and the a greater than 0 is going to have the +7. The only other thing that's changing is our period, so we have to find omega. So that's what I'm doing here. So 6 pi equals 2 pi over omega, so omega equals 1/3. So we type both equations in. Okay, last one. We have, they want us to find the period and the amplitude. Don't ever, ever, ever give a negative amplitude. It's always the absolute value. So for this case, you're noticing they have a negative here. Now, sine is an odd function, so you could rewrite this as, instead of 3/5 sine -2 pi over 5x, pull the negative out. But it really doesn't matter. You just don't want your period or your amplitude to be negative. They won't accept that. So your amplitude is going to be this 3/5, and your period is going to be 2 pi divided by the 2 pi over 5, which turns out to be 5. Okay, I know that was a lot, guys. Just send me questions if you have them. Next, we're going to go to tangent, cotangent, cosecant, and secant graphs.